Today I'm going to be showing you how to crochet this gorgeous corner to corner moss stitch blanket. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how you crochet the corner to corner moss stitch for a rectangular blanket, and I'm also going to show you how to add this lovely moss stitch border afterwards to really finish off your project. I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the materials that I used for my personal blanket. However, you are free to use any yarn that you so wish. Just note with the moss stitch, for the main corner to corner moss stitch itself, I advise going up one hook size from your chosen ball band's recommendation. And for the moss stitch border, you want another hook size up again for the border itself, because this moss stitch border can be quite tight. So you're going to need two different hook sizes for this entire project. For my blanket on the table, I used Cinnamon Swirl Cakes in the colour Tropical Breeze. For the border, I used Paintbox Chunky in the colour White. Now I used a 6mm crochet hook for the main body of the blanket itself and a 7mm crochet hook for the border. With a moss stitch border, it's always advisable to go up one hook size from the hook size you've been using for the main body of the blanket. You can also see I used the Cinnamon Swirl Cakes in the border as well. To begin, pop a slip knot onto your hook. Then chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Now into that very first chain that you made, we're going to work a moss stitch. Now you can work into whichever part of the chain you find easiest. For me personally, when doing a corner to corner moss stitch, I find it's easier to work into the back bump, purely so I can identify these skip chains a bit better. So into that very first chain, we're going to work a single crochet. Now it might be handy for you to grab a stitch marker at this point. And what you want to identify is your single crochet that you just made, which is this little section here, and then your skipped chains, 1, 2. In between those, there is a tiny, tiny little gap. In that little gap, you want to pop your stitch marker. It's really easy to miss. You're not going to need a stitch marker for every single row. I find just right in the beginning, identifying that little tiny space in between your skipped chains and your single crochet super helpful. For row 2, we're going to chain 3 and turn. Now into that space that we just marked, we're going to work an increase. Now an increase is single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet again into the same chain space. We can get rid of our stitch marker now. So you'll have 3 chains, single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. Now that chain 1 in between these 2 single crochets can be tricky to spot, so just keep an eye on this. For row 3, we're going to chain 3, turn, and we need to find that first chain 1 space. Now the moss stitch is worked into the chain 1 spaces in between single crochets. Now when you have one to find, and it is in between those 2 single crochets that you just made. So on an increase, we do single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So we need to find that little spot in between these single crochets to work our first single crochet. Now you can identify your single crochet by 2 legs here, that's 1 stitch, and 2 little legs here, that's your second stitch. So we're aiming in between those 2 stitches. So into that chain 1 space, there it is, work a single crochet. Now also be careful when you come through that you are not splitting your stitches. You want to clearly see your 2 legs of your single crochet here, 2 legs of a single crochet here, and my hook hasn't accidentally gone through one of these gaps. So come through the chain 1 space and work a single crochet. Now chain 1, And we're immediately back over to this chain 3 gap. Into this chain 3 gap at the end, we work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, all into that same chain 3 gap. For row 4, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn. We need to identify that very first chain 1 space, which is in between these 2 single crochets of your increase. Into that chain 1 gap, the very first one, it's easy to miss, so this is the one we need to be looking for. In there, work a single crochet. Again, being careful not to split your stitches. Then chain 1, find the next chain 1 space. It is vastly easier to find because your 2 single crochets are further apart. So we've got the chain 1 space here. Work your next single crochet in there. Then chain 1, and we're left with the chain 3 gap at the end where we work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. For row 5, chain 3 and turn. Work your first single crochet into the first chain 1 gap, which is in between these 2 tightly packed single crochets. So work your first single crochet in there. And now we can start to properly work the moss stitch. So chain 1, find your next chain 1 space, work a single crochet in there. Chain 1, find your next chain 1 space, work a single crochet in there. Chain 1, and then all we're left with is this chain 3 at the end where we work an increase. So into that chain 3 gap, single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So you can see we are growing in a triangular shape with these increased rows. This is what will get you the width of your blanket. So we're going to keep repeating this last row. Chain 3, turn, find the first chain 1 space, which will be in between that increase, and work your first single crochet in there. Then chain 1, work a single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, work a single crochet into the next chain 1 space. We're going to work this all the way into every chain 1 space, chain 1, work a single crochet into chain 1 space, chain 1, and then when you have run out of chain 1 spaces to work into and you only have this larger chain 3 at the end, we work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. One more time for a recap for this increase row that we're just going to keep repeating back and forth. Chain 3, turn your work. Find the first chain 1 space, which is in the increase from the row below, and work your first single crochet. Then chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space. Keep doing this until you have run out of chain 1 spaces to work into. Then chain 1 if you haven't already, and into this end chain 3 gap, work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet, all into the same spot. So we're going to keep working that last row back and forth until your blanket is the width that you want it to be along this short edge. So we're just going for width. So if you wanted a 60-inch wide blanket, keep repeating that last row until your short edge is 60 inches wide. I'm going to go ahead and just work up a couple more rows and then meet me back here when you have the correct width that you want for your blanket. So once you have the width that you require, we now need to work on making this triangle a rectangle. So we have one row to make as a setup row, and then the midsection, turning it rectangular, is a 2-row repeat. So for the setup row, we're going to chain 3 and turn, just as you have been doing. Going to work our first single crochet into that first chain 1 space, so in the increase, exactly as you have been doing. And then we're going to work chain 1, single crochet, all the way along your row, just as you have been doing. Now, once we approach the other side, and you've worked your last single crochet into that last chain 1 space, you can chain 1, and now we're at the chain 3 space where we had been working our increases. Now we want to stop increasing on this side, so instead of working an increase, we are simply going to end this row with 2 single crochets into this chain 3 space. So single crochet, do not chain, single crochet. That is the one-off setup row that we only need to work once. Now for the midsection of the blanket, we're going to be doing a 2-row repeat. And that is so we can continue to grow the length on one side without adding any more width on this top side. So this top side will become our decreased side, whilst the long side will still increase on. So for the first row of this midsection, the first pattern repeat row, this is what we're going to do. I'll recap this a couple of times. We're going to chain 2 and turn. Now we work our moss stitch into the chain 1 spaces, and there is no chain 1 space in between these last 2 single crochets that we made. So we're going to skip over those entirely to find the first chain 1 space after them. And into that chain 1 space after them, that is where we work our first single crochet. So you have chained 2, skipped 2, and worked your first single crochet into the first chain 1 space. Now this is a decrease side, and you might want to just grab a stitch marker or a little snippet of yarn to mark this side of the work. I'm just going to pop a little scrap of yarn into my chain 2 space. That way I have a visual reminder of which is my decrease side. So this will always be my decrease side, which is the short side. Now continue to work your moss stitch as normal. So chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space. Keep going all the way back up to the top. Now to end this row 1 of the midsection, I've worked my last single crochet into the last chain 1 space, chain 1 if you haven't already, and into the chain 3 space, which is at the end here, we're going to work an increase because this is the side which will give us the length. So we need to keep increasing on this side whilst we decrease on this side. So into that chain 3 space at the end of this first row, we work an increase. So single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. For row 2 of these 2 repeat rows, we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and turn. Work your first single crochet into the first chain 1 space, which on this side, the increase side, is in between the 2 single crochets of your increase on the row below. So into there, into that chain 1 gap in between those 2 quite tightly packed single crochets, work your first single crochet, just as you did for all these increase rows. Then we're going to chain 1, work a single crochet into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, work a single crochet into the next chain one space, all the way down. And as I'm on the decrease side, I'm going to work my last single crochet into the last chain one space and then stop. All I have here is a chain two space, the decrease side that I marked with my yarn. Do not chain after your last single crochet into that chain one space, and we're just going to work one single crochet into this chain two space. So single crochet in the last chain one space, do not chain, single crochet into that chain two space. So these are the 2 rows that we're going to be repeating back and forth. So let's do a little quick recap, of the first row of these 2 rows. We're on the decrease side, so we start by chaining 2. 1, 2. Turn your work and find the first chain one space to work into. Now we have just done 2 single crochets with no chain in between them. So skip over these first 2 stitches, find your first chain one space and work your single crochet into that. Then we're going to chain 1 single crochet into all the chain one spaces from the row below, all the way back along. So I'm working my last single crochet into my last chain one space. This is my decrease side over here. So I know that this is my increase side. So to end this first row, we're going to chain 1 and into the chain 3 gap at the end, we work an increase because we are on the increase side. Then the second of these 2 repeat rows, we're going to chain 3, turn, find that first chain one space, which is in between these 2 single crochets that are tightly packed together because we've just done an increase. So in there, work your first single crochet, then chain 1, single crochet into all the chain 1 spaces along the row. As you approach the other side, work 1 single crochet into that last chain 1 space. Do not chain and end with 1 single crochet into the chain 2 space at the end. So you can see how we now are forming a short side on the decrease. If I turn it this way, it might be a bit more clear. We've got a short side on the decrease and we have a long side on the increase. So this is the width of your blanket. This increase side is the length of your blanket. So you're going to repeat those 2 rows back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until your blanket is the length that you want it to be. I'm going to work that one more time. So I'm going to go back and then forth. So I'm on the decrease side, so I chain 2, skip over those first 2 stitches and work my first single crochet into the first chain 1 space, then work my moss stitch. I'm ending on an increase side, so I increase into that chain 3 gap. Then the second row, I chain 3, turn, work a single crochet into that first chain 1 space, which is hiding in that increase, and work my moss stitch back down to the decrease side. because it's a decreased side, in that last chain 1 space, I work just 1 single crochet, do not chain, and end with a single crochet into the chain 2 space. So once your blanket is the width that you want it to be and the length that you want it to be, you should be ending on a short row side. So on this shorter side is where you end before we begin the decrease row, which will bring it back into a rectangular shape. Now, if your length is perfect on this longer side, you are going to have to just work 1 more row back down so you end on this decreased short side. So once you are ready, your blanket is the length you want it to be, the width you want it to be, you've ended on the short side. Now we're ready to decrease. Now the decrease is just a 1 row repeat. So we're no longer doing a back and forth of 2 rows, we're just doing 1 row. So the decrease row is as follows. We're going to chain 2 and turn. We're going to skip these 2 single crochet because there is no chain 1 space in between them. We're going to find the first chain 1 space. So skip over those 2 single crochet and work your first single crochet into that first chain 1 space. Then we're going to single crochet, chain 1 into all the chain 1 spaces along this row. Now I've just worked my last single crochet into the last chain 1 space of this row, and because now we are decreasing on both sides, do not chain, and instead into this chain 3 gap at the end here, we're going to work just 1 single crochet. So we have 2 single crochets with no chain in between them. Now we repeat this row. Chain 2, turn, find the first chain 1 space, so that is after these 2 single crochets. They do not have a chain in between them, so find the first chain 1 space and work your first single crochet in there, then chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space all the way down. These decreased rows go nice and quickly. So once you have worked your last single crochet into the last chain 1 space of the row, you've just got this chain 2 at the end. So into that chain 2 space, we just work 1 single crochet. So you can see it's starting to come back in. Now you're going to repeat this decrease row back and forth until you have just 2 single crochet remaining in your row. So keep going, chain 2, turn, skip the first 2 single crochet, find your first chain 1 space and work a single crochet into it. Then chain 1, single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and repeat that all the way along until you've run out of chain 1 spaces. Once you have worked your last single crochet into the last chain 1 space from the row below, you'll only have your chain 2 left. Into that chain 2 gap, work 1 single crochet. So keep going until you have just 2 single crochet remaining. So I have just worked chain 2, single crochet into the chain 1 space, and then a single crochet into the last chain 2 space. So I only have 2 single crochets remaining in this row. So for the very final row, we're going to chain 1, turn, skip those 2 single crochet, and into the chain 2 gap, work 1 single crochet. That is the last stitch of your entire rectangular blanket. So to finish off, we're going to chain 1, cut your yarn, leaving a nice long length to weave in. Pull that up and out, pull it tight, and the main body of your blanket is complete. We can also now remove the little decreased side marker. I could have done that ages ago. Now you can leave your blanket as is. I'm quite a fan of when a stitch creates quite a pretty pattern by itself. You can see it's got this quite sweet little eyelet all the way around, to just leave it. Sometimes blankets don't need a border. However, if you did want to put a border on it, I'm going to show you how I worked this moss stitch border around. Now, if you are doing a moss stitch border, you want to go up a hook size from the hook size that you have been using for your blanket. I've been using a 6mm hook, so I'm going to go up to a 7mm hook. Now, a lot of this is down to personal tension. You may find you need to go up another hook size again. Trial and error is the best way to find out what your tension is like, but moss stitch will have a tendency to pull in and be a bit tighter. So if you find going up just one hook isn't enough, you can go up to another hook size again. A little bit of experimentation is required for a moss stitch border. So I'm going to do away with my 6mm hook. Thank you, hook, you have been very useful. And now I am back to my larger hook. So I'm going to grab my contrasting yarn and we're going to begin the moss stitch border. So for the first row of your moss stitch border, pop a slip knot onto your hook. And I'm going to create a standing single crochet. So this stitch where we have just cut our yarn, I'm going to pop my first single crochet into the top of that stitch. Now you can work it wherever you find easiest. This is a very forgiving border when it comes to first row placement of stitches, but I'm going to work mine into the top of this last single crochet that I made. So I'm just putting my hook straight in, draw a loop through. You'll have 2 loops on your hook. So I've got my slip knot and that loop I have just drawn up, then yarn over and draw through both loops. That creates my standing single crochet stitch. Now chain 2 and work a single crochet back into the exact same place where you worked that first one. This forms our first corner. Now we're going to be working the moss stitch around. Now on the sides, it's nice and easy. We can see perfectly where we're going to place our stitches thanks to those little eyelets. So we're going to chain 1 and single crochet into the first gap. Nice and even. Don't worry too much, just where it naturally wants to fall. Then chain 1, find your next sort of natural gap and pop a single crochet in there. Chain 1, single crochet. Now depending on your tension, the yarn you are using, your hook size, all of that jazz, you work these single crochets wherever they naturally fall. You don't want to be trying to straddle too far, because if it is too tight, it will pull in like this. Also, if you find that your stitches are ruffling, that means you have too many. So it's a sort of little bit of trial and error for this first row. What you're aiming for is stitches that just lie flat. So chain 1, single crochet into these chain gaps at the end of your row. So I'm not working into the single crochet rows, I'm working into these little chain spaces here. But as I say, you work into the bit that you find your stitches naturally fall into. I do hope that makes sense. So just working my way down the side, doing a moss stitch. And then we are going to reach this corner where we have 2 single crochets. There is no chain space on this corner, this first corner. So what I like to do is chain 1 if you haven't already. I like to pick up those 2 loops on the side. It's nice and clear on this chunky yarn here. And under those 2 loops, I'll work my new corner. So that's single crochet, chain 2, single crochet back into the exact same spot. So now we're going to be working along a short edge, and just as before, chain 1 and single crochet nice and evenly along. For me, that entails falling into these little chain spaces. If you need to add stitches for your tension, that's totally fine. Just working my way along with the moss stitch. And now I have reached the slip knot of the beginning of our blanket. So I'm going to chain 1, and instead of working into this slip knot, I like to work into the sort of gap right there. It's a little bit more sturdy. So I'm just going to work into this little gap rather than the actual slip knot itself. Create my single crochet, then chain 2 and single crochet back into the same spot to create a corner. So now we have worked along 2 sides. We're going to repeat the same thing. Come along this side, form a corner of single crochet, chain 2, single crochet, and then work our way back over here. Now a quick tip for you. At this point, just count how many single crochets you have made into this long side. So for me, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I know I need to create 10 along this side. I have just created 1. So I need 9 more. And that 9th one will fall on a corner. So this is a good way just to make sure you've got it even numbers wise. And in case you need to fudge anything or add an extra stitch or take away an extra stitch, just know the stitch count, ideally you want it to be the same. So that's 1, 2, 3. Let's find out if I can do this. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I need a 9th and a 10th for it to be the same stitch count as this side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So how I'm going to do this and tackle it is just like we did over on this side, working into the side of a stitch. I'm going to work into the side of this single crochet. You can see it sort of naturally is still part of the side. So I'm going to work 1 in here. This will be my 9th. Chain 1, and then my 10th, I'm going to go into this chain space. So I now have 10 single crochet on this side and 10 single crochet on that side. I'm going to do the same for my short edge. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 along the short edge. Now I've already got 1, the standing single crochet we made right in the beginning. So I need 6 more. Now I'm going to form a corner in the same place where I just worked my last single crochet. So I'm going to chain 2, work a single crochet in there. So now I already have 2 of the single crochets required. I need 7, so I've got to make 5 more of these. So I'm going to chain 1. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need 1 more. So I'm going to sort of vaguely force it in here. So it's quite forgiving, this stitch. So I'm just going to pop my last single crochet in there. Then I'm just going to double check I have got the right stitch count so they are matching. Okay, So now I have the same number of stitches on the sides and on the shorter edges. So to end this first slightly annoying, slightly tricky, slightly you might have to fudge it row, we're going to chain 1 and then slip stitch to the top of that first standing single crochet that you made. So I'm just slip stitching into that stitch and then slip stitch into the chain 2 space. Check you're lying flat. You can pull your corners out a little bit, make them a bit more noticeable. And now for row 2 onwards, it's vastly more simple. For rows 2 onwards of your moss stitch border, we're in the chain 2 space. We're going to chain 1. Does not count as a stitch, and into this chain 2 space we're going to form a new corner. So single crochet, chain 2 and single crochet back into that same chain 2 space. So we've formed a new corner. Now we are simply working the moss stitch nice and easy. Chain 1, single crochet into the chain 1 space below, chain 1, single crochet into the chain 1 space below. Just as you did on these diagonal rows, we're now going around and round. Chain 1, single crochet into the chain 1 spaces from the row below, chain 1. Work this along the sides of your blanket. And then when you hit your chain 2 space, form a new corner. So that's single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. So you can see it wants to pull in, which is why going up a hook size is always a good idea for a moss stitch border. So keep working this around and around. We have the straight moss stitch on the sides and your corners are formed with single crochet, chain 2, single crochet. To finish each round of this moss stitch border, you'll chain 1, find that first single crochet that you made, slip stitch into the top of that one, and then slip stitch into the chain 2 space. Now for my personal border, I did 3 rounds in white, and then I switched to using the yarn that I made the blanket with. So if you would like to do that, all you need to do is to fasten off the white. We're going to chain 1, cut the yarn, leaving a nice long tail to weave in and pull that up. Then grab your next colour. Once you have your next colour, we're going to do exactly what we did with the first round, which is create a standing single crochet. So I'm going to pop a slip knot onto my hook. And then I like to join into a different corner. Purely personal preference. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I just like to have it. I just feel it looks a little bit neater. So I'm going to join into any of these chain 2 spaces with my new colour. Got my slip knot on my hook. Just insert my hook in, drop a loop. 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, pull through 2. That's my first standing single crochet there. Then chain 2 and single crochet back into that same corner. So we create a new corner with a new colour, and then you can continue working your moss stitch around. Because I am only working 1 round in this different colour, to finish, I'm simply going to slip stitch to that standing single crochet, and I'm not going to bother slip stitching into the chain 2 space. So I'm just going to chain 1, cut my yarn, leaving an end to weave in, and pull it up and tight. Now how I finished the final row of my moss stitch border, I did something just ever so slightly different, and I'm going to show you that now. So for the very last row of my border, whether you are adding a new colour or you're carrying on with the existing colour as I did here, so I did 3 rows of white, 1 row of the cinnamon cake, and then 2 rows of white to finish. On that very last white row, I changed how I did my corners. So instead of chaining 2, I just chained 1 before putting my single crochet back in. So I just did straight moss stitch all the way round with a chain 1 in the corners rather than a chain 2. I just found that for me personally, that neatened it off quite nicely and took away any sort of slight curving that you may have. Let's see if I can find a corner that's doing it. Here we go. Slightly curving round. The minute I just did 1, you can see it straightens it off beautifully. So for that final round, do not chain 2 in the corners, just chain 1. So once you have finished your very last stitch and your very last chain 1 of your moss stitch border, slip stitch to the top of the next single crochet. It will be the first one you made in the row. Chain 1, cut your yarn, leaving a nice long tail for weaving in, pull it tight, and then take a moment to just pull your corners into shape. Then all that's left to do is weave in your ends and your blanket is complete. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please do let me know what you think of this blanket down in the comments. And until next time, happy crocheting. Bye.